Hey, Ziv, how's it going? Can't hear you.
Go, hang on. How about now?
I can hear you just fine. How's it going?
Good, good, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Sorry about that. Just working out some little glitches as we try and figure out how LinkedIn works. But anyway, thanks for doing this. And before we start, just a big shout out to everyone who's been supporting this little experiment of mine for the last couple of weeks. Thanks for all your comments. And what this is essentially is just a series of interviews or conversations, with some of my friends and contacts in the real estate industry. We spoke with one of my friends, Taco, a real estate coach from the Netherlands who's been in Malaysia for the last few years in episode one. And today we're lucky enough to have Mr. Ziv Nakajima-Magen from Fukuoka in Japan. So, Ziv, again, back to you. How is it in Japan right now? How you doing?
Getting hot, getting vaccinated very slowly. So hopefully looking good. Maybe by sometime next year we'll be able to get out and about again.
Okay, and for those who don't know where Fukuoka is, could you just give them a little brief geographically speaking?
Yeah, so Fukuoka is the biggest city in Western Japan on the Kyushu landmass. So people probably are more familiar with Nagasaki, which is on the landmass, but Fukuoka is actually a lot bigger. We've got about 1.5 million people population wise and a very active international airport. And it's actually a lot closer to Southeast Asia or definitely to Taiwan and Korea and parts of China than it is to Tokyo, even. So it's kind of like the Western gateway into Japan.
Right. Okay, so let's go back a bit. And I've known you for almost about 5 or 6 years now,
Yeah.
from a couple of companies ago. And I was introduced to you by one of my mutual friends, Manabu.
Yep.
uh, Manabu Suzuki, who is very well known to the leading RV network and has been a good friend of ours. So now let's go back a bit. Now, where you originally from, and how? Give us a little gist into your journey into real estate and how you came to Japan.
Okay, so I was born and bred in Israel, and in my late 20s, I migrated to Australia.
Hmm.
Sort of followed the old family connection there. And I lived there for about 10 years. And that's when I first met Japanese people. I didn't know anything about Japan. I actually was exposed to Japan in Australia.
Yeah.
And my wife, who was Japanese, whom again I met in Australia, my wife at the time unfortunately passed away a little bit after our son was born. So that was 2011. And I had a real estate property at the time. So I had a little bit of experience with managing tenants and that sort of thing with a single property. And when I looked to invest, what I wanted to do is to keep the Japan connection alive for my son.
Right.
So I was looking into some ways to invest into Japan so that I'd have an excuse to come and go and live here and have something, a financial foothold or just a reason to be in touch with Japan.
Yeah.
And just knowing real estate a little bit, I started looking into real estate, which was what I felt most comfortable with at the time. And in the process, I met my then just business partner and now my second wife, Chikako. And we bought a few properties for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So she was interested in more international business exposure. I was interested in a Japanese partner. So it worked out well. We bought a few investment properties for ourselves. And after we had 3 or 4 of those under our belt, we sort of realized that there are probably quite a few people out there who'd be interested in the same sort of investment, but just don't have the access because Japan is very insular on a language and cultural level.
Yeah.
And that's how we started NTI, which is the company that we've been running for the past decade or so.
Fantastic. And before we started actually talking about doing this, I actually had you send me your most embarrassing picture that you could think of.
No, don't do that.
Well, I have to embarrass you in some way. I haven't seen you for so long. But so tell me, who is this guy and how old is he and what's he thinking right now?
Well, this guy would be 18 in 2 or 3 months. So he's just joined the army, which isn't really a choice in Israel. It's mandatory. We all have to do that.
Yep.
As combative as the picture might look, he actually went to a military programmer's course. But the uniform looks cool, doesn't it? Yes, so he flunked the programmer's course.
Okay.
That didn't deter him. So he did all sorts of things in the army until he finished his service. And then he was still determined to go on with programming when he went out of the army, and he went to study that again as a civilian and graduated and even got a job as a programmer, but very quickly realized that this really wasn't for him because he likes to run his mouth and talk to people all day long, which is pretty much what I've been doing since that day.
Oh yeah, we know about that. So then let's jump ahead a little bit, right? So now you are now in Japan. Your company is called Nippon Tradings, and I've had the benefit of visiting your office, spending time with you in Fukuoka, going around and looking at the wealth of opportunities. So, in a nutshell, in brief, how would you describe your current business, and who do you cater to? What is the business all about?
Okay, so again, the main point, I mean, the reason for our existence, which is also the same reason for a lot of businesses that are Japan related and foreigner related, is somebody needs to bridge the gap. Because if you think about real estate markets all over the world, which is probably what your listeners are more familiar with, yep. Let's say you go to the Philippines or to any non-native English-speaking country, or to Thailand or to China, there'd always be a gamut of real estate operators who are really, really happy to work with foreigners, and they'd have English-speaking staff, and it becomes a matter of just sifting through them and figuring out who the reliable ones are.
Yeah.
In Japan, the opposite holds true. So most of the professionals, I'd say 90% of the professionals you'd be working with are completely reliable. There's no sifting required, but the sifting that is required is to find the ones that will agree to work with foreigners and who can communicate in any language other than Japanese. And that's very rare here. So if you look at Tokyo, for example, there's maybe 10 or a dozen real estate related companies, property managers, real estate agents, what have you, that can service foreigners. If you go down the road to Osaka, there's maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of those. Fukuoka has 1 or 2. And the smaller, and these are not small cities by any means. So unless you're investing in very foreigner, internationally savvy locations, like in the heart of Tokyo, or in Niseko, which is like a really popular international ski village up in Hokkaido, or right next to a US Army base, in those locations, you'd probably be able to find somebody to work with.
Right.
But in all other locations, if you're non-Japanese, maybe 50% of the agents will agree to work with you. If you don't speak the language, it goes down to maybe 20 or 10%. And if you're residing overseas, it's close to 0%. They're just extremely foreigner shy. So what we as a company do for anyone who's interested in buying or purchasing or managing property in Japan is you're going ahead with the embarrassing pictures, aren't you? You just keep on plowing ahead.
The thing is,
this is Chicago,
not only
yes.
your life partner, this is your business partner as well. So I feel it's
Correct.
important to highlight the critical level of work that you do, and also the amount of fun that you
have. We usually look a bit more serious than that when we work, but yes.
You do.
Yeah, this is Chicago. And even today, I mean, after 10 years living in Japan, and I speak at least rudimentary Japanese, or street Japanese, maybe is what I like to call it. Still, if I was to make the first contact with a real estate agent or a property manager and say, "Hi, I've got foreign customers and we want to buy property, or we have properties, will you manage them for us?" I'd get 90% no's, just for the fact that I don't speak business Japanese. I don't do things properly. My face is non-Japanese. So there really has to be so what we do is we provide the Japanese side with a Japanese presence and a company to deal with.
Right.
Chikako or her staff will be making the first contact. And one of the first things they have to do is to promise that agent or that property manager or that insurance company, they have to promise them that they'll never have to speak to a foreigner. They'll never have to read or produce any documents in English. Everything will be done through us.
Right.
And on the foreigner side, which is my side of the company, is we bridge that gap for them. So we give the whether they're investors or holiday homeowners, whatever they're looking at, we give them a single point of contact to work with, everything in English. They don't need to contact 3 or 4 or 5 different Japanese companies. They don't have to get lost in translation.
Right.
And just the market is a lot more open to them. Whereas if they have to work with the foreigner-specific companies, they'd have access to maybe 5-10% of the market.
Okay. So no, and you know what? Thank you for that. And I know firsthand from you and some of my other friends that the real estate market in Japan is actually incredibly lucrative, and actually is on the surface it's quite friendly to foreigners because it allows freehold ownership, and there are really no restrictions on buying and selling and transacting property over there like there are in some of the countries. But yes, you do need local representation. It helps to have somebody who speaks the language and knows their way around. So tell me something. So when you first came to Japan, how many years has it been now?
17, 18 years.
Oh, wow. So when you first got the green around the ears with a little bit of knowledge of Japan and you just want to, so did you get into real estate right away, or did real estate come at a later stage?
Much later. So first I was living in Australia, and again I was married to a Japanese lady, and we came and went. Came to visit the parents. We made some friends in Japan. We'd come here maybe once or twice a year for a visit, but we were still living in Australia. Right. And at that point, real estate was the furthest thing from my mind. I mean, I was working in IT project management before I left Israel, and then in IT tech support or company installations when I lived in Australia. And then when she got pregnant, we opened the import, export, and market stall business. So we were kind of like doing the hippie trail, going to festivals and markets and so forth, and selling accessories and bags and jewelry, stuff like that, just so that we could work together and spend time together. So nothing to do with real estate. That all started when I was looking again to invest in Japan. So much, much later, about 10 years ago.
Okay. Okay. And then when you started, did you jump straight into Nippon Tradings? Did you try working with a local agency first? Or what was your first foray into Japanese real estate like from the other side, not as an investor?
Well, we only purchased our first 3 properties that we purchased were investment properties. At the time, they were very cheap. They're still cheap in various areas of the country, but not in Fukuoka, where we bought our first 3. Right. So we worked with the agents, and we worked on a personal capacity. It was just our own investment properties for our own portfolio, for just to generate some sort of income in Japan. Right. And then we started doing the same thing on behalf of customers. And a lot later down the track, maybe 2 or 3 years after we started, then we bought our own personal residence, and then our office, and then we bought a few more investment properties, sold our personal residence, bought another one. So we actually started with investing. We were still renting when we owned investment properties before we owned our own home.
Right. So the end goal is to have a business and have your own investment properties coming up from where you draw passive income, and then also have good capital release in like a few years and reinvest and so on. Or what's in the future? Would you like to become a developer at some stage, or a large-scale investor?
First of all, I want to drop the passive income. It is not passive income. It's time-consuming, and there's hassles involved and decisions to be made. It's passive in the sense that you can take a nap. You don't actually have to work during the night, and the income is still accruing. But there's nothing passive about it. But the goal is I don't think the goal will be development. I mean, we've expanded our services beyond. When we started, the most popular asset class was just like cheap investment units, like little condo units, studios, 1-bedrooms, and so forth. We've since expanded with market demand. So when people contact us and they ask us about small buildings, we'll help them with the building. If they want to buy a onsen resort, we'll help them with that. If they want to buy a holiday home, there's been a lot of that lately. We'll help them with that. So I think, and we also help them with organizing. So we'll help them buy a prefab house and put it on the property. We'll help them to furnish the property. We'll help them with renovations, repairs, that sort of thing. With developments, if there's a need for it, we probably get into it again as a third-party operator, not as a developer ourselves.
Yeah.
But I think this is distant future now, but I think the real long-term game plan is maybe to provide the same sort of service in other countries that are not as accessible. So to try and replicate the model of what we've done in Japan, for example, Italy. Chikako's lived in Italy for a year. She loves the country. She speaks the language, kind of like I speak Japanese, I guess, at the same level.
You mentioned that she speaks more than just a couple of languages, right? She's a polylinguist.
She definitely speaks more than me. She speaks Italian, French, obviously English, and Japanese. I'm limited. Well, I speak Hebrew, but there's not much demand for that in my line of work. But yeah, English and very rudimentary Japanese. A little bit of Arabic, but just like a high in curse words and so forth. Okay. So maybe to replicate the same model in other countries that we find attractive to visit once in a while. So Italy, maybe Israel at some point, maybe other countries in Asia. I mean, once you've managed a portfolio remotely, I think the fundamentals are pretty much the same. I mean, there are obviously building blocks that are different in every country, but once you get the hang of selecting a team that knows what they're doing on the ground in that country, and once you know that your due diligence is more about the people that you work with than it is about the properties themselves,
right?
You can, after some studying, you can replicate that model in other countries and environments as well, I think.
Okay, well, getting back to like life in Japan. So now, for all of us Gaijins, whenever we come over there, we come, it's all about the food, all about the drinks, all about nights out, in between, lots of meetings and so on. So, but on a day-to-day basis, what is a typical day at work for you? Because you've given me multiple sides. I've seen this side of you personally, and I think I have never seen this side. Ziv, the amazing public speaker, actually wearing. So tell me about how do you flip-flop between this? But going back, like what is an average day at work for you?
It really depends on the season. And obviously now with COVID, everything's flipped over again. Usually because I'm on the customer side of the business and our customers are mostly overseas and they're in different time zones, and most of the communication would be done via email or Skype. So these public speaker gigs that you see is actually they're aimed at the smaller part of our clientele, which is the expats who actually live in Japan.
Right. Okay.
So about 80% of our customers live out of Japan. When they come here like you do. They come here to meet us or other business partners, or maybe to take a walk around the neighborhood where they're interested in, but they don't actually come here for property purchases. So the vast majority of communication is done online, Skype or Zoom or emails, messaging and so forth. But if and when there is a demand from expats who are looking for a local expert, then yes, I do occasionally do seminars or public speeches in various venues wherever there's a need for it. And I do the podcast. So the Japan Real Estate Podcast comes out once a week.
Yep.
I think it's the only podcast on that topic, so it's pretty popular. And occasionally videos like this one. So you see my top half. I'm looking kind of like I look in the public speak gigs, but we don't want to look at the bottom half. But yeah.
Well, I actually have an alternative image for you. So I don't know what's going on over here. Whether you asked to model through a fruit shop or something, or this is
a wedding hat designer. Yeah.
That's brilliant. So
that was hilarious, actually. That was the advantage of sometimes wearing a suit. I went to a bar with a customer who came to visit, and while we were drinking at the bar, this Japanese photographer, approached me, and he really liked the look of the suit. So he asked me if I would model for his catalog. Worst paying job ever. I don't know how models make a living, but I got a really nice book of photos of it.
You got some fruit to it, I guess.
Yes.
So you know what, right now, you mentioned like COVID, and of course it's taken over the world and it's been awful for all kinds of businesses, especially the real estate sector, which depends a lot on interpersonal contact. But going by what you said and going by what I know about you, even before COVID, your model was catered towards expats living in Japan, but you did get a significant, or at least a a comfortable number of inquiries from outside Japan as well would contact you. And
Most of them are out of Japan, actually.
out of Japan, okay.
Our Japan resident clientele is maybe 20% of our business. Vast majority are out of Japan, and that's been the case from the get-go. So
Okay.
we were actually working remotely, at least on the customer side, from the very start. When we started the business, the first year or so, we were actually still in Australia. So we came here to meet the Japanese partners, because in Japan you do have to have face-to-face meetings. They're a lot less accepting of remote work.
Yeah.
But the customer side were always remote. It actually blew my mind when we started that people will fork out hundreds and tens of thousands of dollars to people that they've never met except on a Skype call.
Yeah.
But I quickly got used to it, and that's been the case forever for us. So COVID hasn't actually done. It's actually been very good for our business because prices are down and people are buying like crazy.
So, but do people still feel the need to actually come and visit properties? Like other people saying, waiting in the wings and saying, look, I can't come right now, but maybe 2022 when things are better, I'll come. And how is the market changed? Is the market moving slow? Is it quick? General idea, like what's happening.
It really depends on a sector by sector kind of outlook. Some sectors are doing very well, some sectors are not. So residential, which is always considered a sort of safe and stable haven, is actually up, I think, about 70% in transactions since 2020. Hospitality obviously took a huge hit. Retail took a more minor hit, but they were already suffering with the rise of e-commerce before 2020.
Yeah.
But other sectors, I mean, data centers are still on the up and up. Logistics are still on the up and up, and same sort of story. I mean, e-commerce is only getting hotter and hotter with COVID. And assisted living, senior nursing homes, doing very well. And that's probably not going to change with Japan's population trend being what it is.
Yeah. What is the favorite asset class? And I know that's maybe like a hard net to throw out, but if you had to pick, like, what do you think is the favorite asset class of most investors coming into Japan?
For smaller investors, it's usually residential condos or small residential buildings.
Right.
Bigger investors depends on who they are. Institutional investors love the office space in Japan. Central Tokyo, Central Osaka, Central Fukuoka, Central Nagoya office buildings are very popular. Mm-hmm. And the rest of them depends on how opportunistic they are. A lot of people have been trying to get into logistics, shipping centers, warehouses on the outskirts of big cities and so forth. That's getting harder and harder. It's a very hot market segment at the moment. So there's huge demand and very little supply. But I think if you want to run averages, the very, very top popular asset class is condos. Not necessarily houses, because houses in Japan are built from non-durable materials. Part of it is the earthquake. Part of it is the fact that Japanese like everything new. So they're built from wood, steel framed wood, not a lot of stone, not a lot of concrete for the houses.
Yeah.
So you're pretty much rebuilding them every 20 or 30 years. And maintenance costs are a lot higher than they would be. Whereas if you're buying units in reinforced concrete blocks, or you're buying a whole reinforced concrete block, the maintenance aspect is a lot more attractive. It's a lot more stable income.
So I'm actually want to get back to the house spot. I actually had a question about that. But just going by condos right now. So am I right to assume that most people actually come in and they look for condos or like affordable condo investments in the big cities like Tokyo, Osaka, and now of course Fukuoka, since you're there, or are they looking at other like cities as well that are up and coming?
It really depends on the investor and what they're after, and also on whether they're going to be using it for their personal purposes or not. So a lot of people like to buy a condo in a place which they know that they're going to visit on a regular basis and then lease it out short term in the interim.
Right.
So in those cases, they'll usually aim for particular cities, not necessarily the big ones. I mean, there's a lot of people married to a Japanese spouse who want to come here regularly and visit, aging relatives or brothers or sisters. And these people might be out in the countryside. So in that case, they'll go for the biggest city that can give them a good tenant base, but that's close enough to those relatives.
Yeah.
Others, if they're just out for the best possible bargain, highest possible yield, they'll leave it to us, in which case we'll probably, in most cases, I mean, the last 2 years since COVID hit, we have been seeing good deals out of central Tokyo and Osaka, but that's usually the rarity. So in most cases, we'd be pointing them to Nagoya, Fukuoka, Kyoto, and prefectural capital satellite cities, places that are close enough to the big cities to enjoy the same dynamics, but are actually more affordable and provide better yields. So if you're looking at Tokyo, for example, that would be Kawasaki, Yokohama, Chiba City, Saitama City. Okay. If you're looking at Osaka, it might be Kobe. And then prefectural capitals, so like places like Kumamoto and Nagasaki, even though the population there is in decline, actually. And Sapporo, which is also an interesting one, you can get higher yields there because property prices haven't climbed as sharply as they have in other places around the country. But on the downside, because of the long, harsh winters there, it's heavier on the maintenance and longer on the vacancies. If you happen to lose a tenant towards the start or middle of winter, you probably got 5-6 months of vacancy ahead of you.
Right.
People just don't like to move around in the snow.
On condos themselves, now there's, I don't know if this is a rumor or if this is actually fact, so maybe you can help clear it up. But a lot of even my contacts have actually said this to me, is that Japanese condos, the older they get, the less valuable they are. And at some stage, the construction gets devalued over a period of time. Now, is that true? Or is that more of, say, like a case-by-case basis, if it's true?
It is true when they get very old, but what people are usually referring to, and there's a bit of a confusion there, is the tax depreciation life cycle.
Okay.
So from a tax depreciation perspective, a reinforced concrete block reaches the end of its lifespan after 47 years, I think, from memory, at which point you can't claim depreciation on the structure anymore. But what gains value or holds value in Japan is the land. It's got nothing to do with the structure itself. So if you look at Fukuoka, for example, when we started our business, the very first property that we purchased on behalf of a customer was in central Fukuoka in Hakata, right next to Canal City, which is Kyushu's biggest shopping center. So really top location in the heart of the city, hugely coveted, never had a vacancy there, even though it's not even, I wouldn't even call it an apartment. It's 12 square meters. It's like a closet, but there's always somebody who wants to rent it.
Right.
And when we purchased the second property in the same building, which was about 6 or 7 years later, it's more than double the price. Now, that building was built in 1971, so it's definitely at the end of its depreciation life cycle.
Right.
But what's attractive and what drives the prices is the location and the rental yield that they can command. Okay. But at a certain, if the building is, we generally don't recommend buildings these days that are older than 30 years. Not because the tenants wouldn't want them, but because there's a new legislation coming in that's going to put a lot more obligations on owner unions to properly renovate the buildings.
Right.
If they want to get a compliance certificate, which means that either they'll have to hike up building fees significantly to allow for those renovations, or they might choose not to go with the compliance, in which case the value might drop off a cliff because there's going to be a market for certified and non-certified properties at some point.
Okay.
So we recommend not to go beyond 30 years. And if you go beyond 40 or 50 years, then obviously it becomes a lot less attractive to the tenants. But up until that point, they're cash cows. I wouldn't consider that.
Speaking of cash, and just a really, really quick question regarding like financing for overseas buyers, is that only for foreigners who become Japanese residents who are actually living in Japan, or can, say, if I, living in any part of the world, wanted to buy some property in Japan, could I get a loan?
Up until 2 years ago, the answer was 100% no. About 2-3 years ago, some products and some lenders started offering various loans for non-resident foreigners. Okay. But they're all still very early stages, not super attractive. So you have to set up a local Japanese company, which by itself means you have to pay at least $2,000 or $3,000 a year in company upkeep and accounting and bookkeeping fees.
Right.
And then the loan terms are not super attractive. It's somewhere between 3 to 4%, which is not horrible. But these days, especially with COVID, they'll only consider central Tokyo properties of newish build. And they'll insist that you only use them for long-term leases. You're not allowed to Airbnb. You're not allowed to have commercial tenants. And all of that just doesn't end up being very attractive to a foreign investor. So if you're going to be investing in central Tokyo, your yield would be 3 to 4% best with those criteria.
Right.
And they can get that in their backyard. So there's not really a need for them to purchase here.
Okay, so like you mentioned, like if they're, say, married to a Japanese citizen or living there, or maybe want to spend a significant amount of time in Japan for one reason or the other, makes sense. Going to like houses, and this is something I wanted to ask you because I saw you in a recent podcast or in a recent interview.
Yeah.
And of course, there's been a lot of news over the last couple of years about abandoned homes in Japan. You
Yep.
know, I think they're called Ikeas, if correct.
Ikea. Yep.
Ikea. So again, in a nutshell, what is the myth behind the Ikea? Do they exist? Are they as cheap as people make them out to be? And what's the opportunity there for like foreign investors if they want to get into something like that?
Well, they definitely do exist, and they can be very cheap if you're the DIY type and you're taking on this labor of love of renovating the place and bringing it up to speed.
Yeah.
But even if you're buying something livable, you could, if you're lucky and if you got the right people, like the company that we usually recommend are Akia and Inaka. They do a great job of investigating these properties based on people's criteria. Yep. And then they can help you find a very cheap property that would probably be livable or be easily renovatable into a livable property. But these were not going to be investments. So the only way to make them work as investments is because they're in the countryside, right? Being in the countryside in Japan means there's no way you're going to get long-term tenants. That just doesn't exist out there. People either own their properties or they just don't live in that place. So you could potentially turn it into a guest house or like a resort kind of place. But if you've purchased in a place that's very cheap to purchase in, it means that the place is not really attracting too many tourists to begin with.
Fair enough. Just going back to the Ikea concept, why do people actually abandon houses in Japan? I mean, is it something like if like, say, for example, from maybe like an American or some other Western country perspective, say there's a town that's very, maybe it was like something like Detroit, Michigan, which is like the car capital of the world, and all of a sudden the city stopped doing well, so people just left and went for greener pastures. But these are like towns and countryside. So are people leaving because of economics or because of something else?
Yeah, Japan's got the world's fastest declining population, right? It's getting very old very fast.
Yeah.
And what this means is that all of these little townships and villages are slowly emptying out and conglomerating into the bigger city centers that are in the vicinity. And at some point, there's just no more facilities being provided to these locations, right? So the train starts running once a day instead of every hour or two. If you wanna go shopping, you have to drive a good few kilometers to the nearest shop, and it's not going to be any attractive prices like you get from the bigger networks. If you got medical issues, you have to go to the city. So little by little, the people are just moving out as the provision of services dwindles away. And then those areas just completely lose their value unless somebody's done something to rejuvenate them or create some attraction there or move some businesses. They're just going to die out, and then those properties become dirt cheap. I mean, it is true, but again, it's not an investment. So people have to really watch out when they think about it as such. It's definitely not an investment unless you're going to be actively running a business in the property.
Got it. I mean, because there was this flurry over the last year or so, especially in a lot of different countries, where people were leaving big cities and actually going to like smaller towns, villages, and so on, just so they could get away from like congested city centers and hectic living, especially during the time of COVID, and they could have like a more leisurely life while they could still work using Zoom, Facebook, Teams, what have you. Now, and I know, of course, living in Asia, that sometimes that's not the case, because if you look at, say, I come from India, or I have friends in the Philippines, other countries, where being in the city is really where the action is. That's where the money is. And the farther you leave the city, it's not just jobs or money or businesses, but you're also saying no to like potentially better healthcare, education for your kids, and so on. Now, is that the same in Japan as well? And the reason I'm
Same
asking is
dynamics. Yes.
same
Same
dynamic.
dynamics. Probably even a bit more extreme here because the tendency here has been. I mean, COVID has put a little bit of a spin on that in the sense that people who can afford to, in the sense that they have a job that they can do remotely, do tend to look for places that are maybe more suburban or maybe even out of the city. But it's not nearly as much as a trend as it is in Western countries. I mean, the economy here and the industry infrastructure is just not really built for remote work. The whole society here is based on handwritten documents, hand stamped documents, face-to-face meetings, relationship building, going out together for drinks with the boss or the customer or what have you. And it will take a very long time for that to change, I think, if it ever will.
Yeah. Did you, going back to your time in Japan, did you ever work for somebody else, or have you always sort of done your own thing since you got there?
In Japan, no, I would not want to work for a Japanese company, I think.
Is it because just ideologically there's just too much of a clash between, say, what you believe in terms of corporate culture or just your independence? Or, uh, obviously we don't want to offend anyone, but just what's your thought process?
I mean, look, all I have is secondhand witness reports from people who are working in Japanese companies. So take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But there seems to be far too much adherence to protocol and meetings and waste of time paperwork and doing things the same way they've been done for decades and decades. And I personally don't work that way. And I look, even running our own company, it's still a clash. Like I'd go to a meeting with Chikako and, halfway through a very long and detailed explanation, I'd be going, okay, well, can we do this and this? And she's like, wait, he's still talking. Wait, quiet. So I get it. Even running my own business, I don't think I'd be able to handle it as a staffer.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, once I've started working for myself, and this is not really a Japan thing. I mean, I've started this in Australia probably 5 or 6 years before I came here.
Yeah.
Once I've started, for me personally, working for myself, as stressful as it can be, and as much as you don't really have a real holiday, even when you're on holiday, you're constantly working, and on the weekend and what have you.
Yep.
Just the flexibility of being able to make business decisions and manage my schedule and manage my workload and tasks is something that I wouldn't want to give up. So I'm very happy to work with third parties and partners and customers, which are kind of like my boss. But I wouldn't want to work in an existing company structure, I think. But look, time will tell. I could be wrong.
No, I get that. I get that totally. And knowing your personality, I don't see you fitting into sort of like a standard corporate structure. I see you doing your own thing. Maybe being a high-level consultant someday. I don't know.
I did enjoy the corporate life when I was working in big corporations. This is mostly Israel. Before I left, I was working for quite a few very big companies.
Okay.
And I mean, there's something intoxicating about having all these resources at your disposal, right? Like you think up some project, and if you convince a couple of people, they'll give you millions of bucks to invest in it. So I do miss that a little bit, and the whole corporate. I don't want to call it politics, but the intrigue and the various departments working together to make big things happen. I do miss that sometimes, but not enough to want to go back to it now.
But I mean, like the idea of, like putting together like an idea and doing something with it. So in our world, that usually translates into either doing your own construction, becoming a developer, or setting up a fund to invest in different properties. And, like there's many different ways that you get. Could you see yourself pulling your way towards any one of those avenues?
What I like to, we have tried to do some joint ventures with customers who don't. So we have a lot of customers who arrive as a team, right? So they could be family members. Like in Asia, there's a lot of family offices, two brothers and a sister investing together, or they could be a couple or business partners.
My dog wanted to get into the picture.
Hello.
Yeah. This is Coco, 8 months old, very excited.
Hey, Coco.
right?
So
People
what's Coco's role? Is he in development, property management? What does he do?
Coco's in the relocation business because, as you know, we're moving to the UK in a few weeks. So Coco's our good luck mascot right now. Actually, when we got her and living in, you know me, I live in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We never actually pictured getting a dog, and we got her like a few months ago. You know, especially, I mean, for the kids and for our own sanity and whatnot. And
Yeah.
then the move just happened, but it never struck us. You know, we were going to leave her behind, so she's coming with us. So she's basically become the champion of our move.
That's a bit of a mission to move with a pet, isn't it?
It is, it is. But you know what, having said that, and this is the one thing, you know, about our business is when you start tapping into it, you realize that it looks difficult on the surface, but then it's not a problem that other people haven't had before. And the more I
Yeah.
looked into it and the more people I spoke with, I realized that, well, it's actually not that hard. The only thing is with her, now she just has to be well behaved in a 14-hour flight from
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Well, she
I know
interrupted you.
you're right.
I'm not
So,
going to
yeah,
take blame for that.
so to get back to your question, we have tried because people have been inquiring, right? So people are saying, okay, well, I really want to get into, for example, hospitality properties or a share house
Yeah.
or a guest house, but I don't have the funds to do it on my own. Can you hook me up with other investors? So we have tried, but either it's not that they don't get along, but they don't seem to all be on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess the only other option would be for us to be running a fund on their behalf, and then we'd be making all the decisions and just giving them periodical reports. Something that we might be interested in, but before we do that, I'm kind of Japanese in the sense that I like to get a bit more experience under my belt before I pitch a new project to people, to more than one person. So we have a few more creative customers that are always saying, okay, well, what can we do that we haven't done before? So we'd much rather do this with one or two customers that we already know well and like each other. We've worked together. There's no, the expectations are all there. We know what we're going to offer each other from the get-go. And once we've done two or three of these projects with a single or a couple, and then we'd probably feel more comfortable offering it as a fund or as a sourced project.
That's massive, yeah. And I think there could be a big future in that, you know, whether you call it fractional ownership or selling shares in a company. That's good, man. Well, listen, you know, we've been talking for almost almost an hour now. And I think that, and the nice thing is whenever I talk to you, I feel that I could always talk on for more. But I'm just gonna ask you this as we, you know, say our goodbyes for today. What's next for you over the next couple of years? What is life looking like for you? And I leave you with this warm, friendly picture. I don't know if she's being nice to the boy or if she's kicking him in the backside because he did something wrong, but
do that to each other a lot. It's kind of the way they communicate. I think that's Okinawa, by the way. If anyone's never been to Okinawa, we've got a lot more beautiful pictures that don't include us, but it's a gorgeous place you should visit.
Yeah.
I think for us, we need to get our act together, systems and admin wise. We've experienced some very quick growth that we were totally not prepared for. So internally, our management systems are very old-fashioned and need to be upgraded. And the way we delegate tasks and document them so that the next person who comes to work for us will be able to get them right is something that we need to work on. So we're probably going to put a damper on growth for a few years until we're sure that we can service all of our existing customers the way they should be served. And after that, the sky's the limit. I don't know. We'll see.
And then we get back to the good old times, and hopefully I'll be able to stop by for a few drinks in Fukuoka one of these days.
These guys, by the way, are all. The guy on the left is not even. He is Japanese, but he's Brazilian Japanese, and all of them have been our flatmates in Australia. So these are all friends from old backpacker days.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Ziv, thanks a lot for doing this, man. I appreciated it. And we'll catch you soon. And to everybody watching, thanks for watching. And if you have any comments, questions, send those to me. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Ziv, Ziv, you have your email address on the screen right now. It's zmagen or zmagen at nippontradings.com. And nippontradings.com is his website if you want to look at other services and stuff that they offer. And you're also pretty active on Facebook, aren't you, Ziv?
Yes, so Facebook and LinkedIn have been really, really, really good for us. And you can always find me there. There's only one person with my name out there anyway. So wherever you look out for me on Google, I'm sure you'll find me.
I think that makes two of us. We both have very unique names. But
Mm.
all right, brother. Listen, great talking to you. Catch you soon. And thanks for doing this. Catch you soon.
Pleasure.
Take care. Bye.
Yeah.